Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to our next episode of Masters of Product. Our topic for today is how AI is redefining workforce management. And to help us with that topic, in our studio today, we have Poornima Farrar. She's the Chief Product Officer at Rival. She's spent over 16 years leading product innovation at companies like Workday, Salesforce, Alteryx, and of course, most recently at Rival. As for me, I'm your host, Mustafa Kapadia. I help chief product officers build AI native product teams. If your team is using AI, but you're not seeing the impact in speed, quality, or productivity, that's the bridge that we gap. You can learn more about us and our services at echo-point.com. Poornima, welcome to the show. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. So let's start with the beginning at the top, if that's okay with you. Tell me, just for our audience, what exactly is workforce management or orchestration?
Yeah.
What is it? Why does it matter?
Yeah. Historically, workforce management used to mean the operational plumbing. So you're looking at scheduling, you're looking at time and attendance, you're looking at compliance, forecasting labor needs. So you're essentially looking at kind of, how do you manage the workforce in your organization?
Perfect.
Orchestration is the newer, bigger idea that is sitting on top of that. So it's more about coordinating people, systems, and now also increasingly AI agents.
Yes.
Right? So you're looking at kind of the full employee life cycle, so that work actually moves between them instead of just being tracked in each of them separately.
Yes.
So that's kind of the what. Now, the why, in terms of why does it matter now, it's because the workforce itself has gotten more composite. And this has obviously happened over the last several decades, right? The full-time, part-time, gig, remote, global, matrixed. And in addition to all of that, there's also now AI agents that are doing pieces of the same work, which means that because the software layer itself is getting more autonomous, you're kind of adding a new nuance to what workforce management itself means.
Yes.
So kind of two data points in terms of why this matters today. First, is that the projection, if you look at Gartner and some of the other large analysts out there, will tell you that the enterprise applications that organizations are using, 4 out of 5 of them are now shipping with at least one AI agent. Perfect. That is typically, embedded into the system, and someone's trying to kind of come in and leverage that. That is up from 1 out of 3 in 2024. So in 2 years, we've gone from essentially 33% to 80%, depending on how you're looking at the numbers.
Yeah.
But what happens when every system in the stack is making its own decision?
Yes.
Trying to drive its own autonomous agent. Who's coordinating those decisions? Or like what happens when you have dozens of smart tools that are all coming in and trying to talk to each other without really having a good layer? So that's kind of going back to, how do we do the workforce orchestration really well, especially as the labor market continues to change, right? There's a huge transformation coming there as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And you know what, so coming back to your earlier point, is how you define an agent is also very different, right? It could be something that's just a smart pre-fill, which is also an agent, or it could be something that you're talking about from an orchestration perspective. I actually do want to go deeper into that, but before we go into that, let's just kind of set the foundation. So tell me, how is workforce management traditionally done right now? Let's take AI or agents out of it.
Yeah.
Right? Just if you had to rewind back to 2 or 3 years in the past, tell me how most organizations or companies used to do it, and then we can talk about the future. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So again, let's talk about management first and orchestration, right?
Yeah.
So historically, workforce management has been job-based. So it's very hierarchical, it's very periodic. Organizations design relatively stable jobs, they hire people into those jobs, they use management hierarchy to assign work. Workplaces develop these on an annual basis based on budgets. They project demands, they project headcount targets. And then the operational systems, this is where workforce management comes in, would handle kind of the scheduling, attendance, payroll, and compliance. So the model is pretty simple, right? You're forecasting business demand, then you're translating the demand into required positions or labor hours. And
Yeah.
once you have those, then you're going into recruit or schedule employees. You're routing the work through the managers and the organizational departments, and then you're reviewing performance.
Yes.
So what does that then translate into software?
Yeah.
You
Are
have
those three different systems,
uh-huh.
ideally?
Good
Right.
question.
Okay.
That's exactly where I was going next.
Yeah.
You're either looking at point solutions where you have different
Got it.
systems, ATS for recruiting, LMS for learning, separate performance
Mm,
tools, separate scheduling system. Each one of them have their own data model, their own
yeah.
version of the truth. So the coordination falls to the people, right?
Yeah.
The manager
That's
or
the
the HR.
connective tissue. I agree. Yeah.
Correct. Now, the kind of the alternative is saying, okay, we'll put everything under one system. You have a large vendor that does all of it, right?
Mm,
A system of record mindset. So, I'm managing the system of record, and then from there, you're able to get payroll, time tracking, absence,
yeah.
scheduling, recruiting, learning, etc. Well, at the end of the day, that still doesn't solve your problem unless you have an orchestration mindset. Because
Yes.
you still have to coordinate what happens next. You have to forecast. Um, you have to kind of go into, um, sorry. So in that mindset, you still end up running the same flow. Your forecasting is following the same pattern, right? You're scheduling based off of historical averages, not based on what the future state looks like.
Mm,
You're not able to track kind of what
yeah.
the demand for the future might look like if you're doing mergers or acquisitions, or if you're thinking through kind of how you're growing managers based on the skills that are required, as we talked about in terms of AI and some of
Right.
these other things, right? So often it becomes worse. There's multiple legacy systems of records that are
Yeah.
running side by side and never fully unified, which can compound that problem.
Yeah.
So in other words, the traditional model can manage position and people records pretty well, but they don't manage work.
Yeah.
They manage the record itself.
That makes sense. And I think if I had to, at least the way I look at it, or at least the three problems that I think you highlighted. One was the fact is that, you know what, the data is locked into these different systems,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you're very much optimized within what's in that, well, like you said, the system of record piece, right? Which has an impact in which you can do proper forecasting, right?
Yep.
And I think it also has an impact in which that you can, like you said, you talked about people, but not about how work moves across these organizations or these information silos,
Yep.
right? And then the last one is, I'm sure that takes a fair amount of people within the organization to actually be the connective tissue
Correct.
as well. So there's a cost in multiple ends, if I'm not mistaken. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
That is absolutely a fair way to characterize it. And it gets harder when it's remote. It gets harder when you're trying to
That's
transform
true. And
organizations.
well, remote, global,
Uh-huh.
subcontractors, you name
Yep.
it, right?
Yep, exactly. So the complexity compounds also from a generational perspective, right? Like when you have a large cohort that is looking to retire, a lot of the tribal knowledge can get lost, right? Like in terms of how
Yeah.
the coordination itself happens. So often what we see is that when we're talking about workforce management, it's about modeling organizational behavior well,
Yes.
so that you're able to scale the intentionality behind how someone's working in terms of the future state of the organization, not just what it looks like today. And that means thinking in terms of scale, thinking in terms of, how do we put a repeatable process in place that can also manage complexities depending on,
Hmm.
let's say, the geographical nature of time tracking or scheduling or absence, the the data itself flowing across different systems.
Right.
So the changing AI, changing of the AI capabilities in conjunction with how workforce management itself is changing, it makes for a really interesting time,
Yes.
because you're essentially shifting what's being reported on the workforce, what's being handled by the workforce, as well as what's being acted by the software on behalf of
Yes.
the workforce.
Yes. Well, that's perfect. I mean, that's a great segue to what we wanted to get to. So given the challenges that you just shared about and the promise of AI, where do you see these things heading? Let me ask you. Well, let me ask you two questions. Number one, where is it now? Right? Like you said, if every one of every one of these systems of records are shipping an agent with it, right? Where is workforce management or orchestration sitting now? And then let's talk about where you think it's going to be, or where you think it's going in the next 5 years.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I've seen kind of two trends. Often, there's a lot of talk about demand forecasting, labor market forecasting. So really, like that piece has continued to stay from a use case perspective pretty standard. But the underlying technology and how people are thinking about it has continued to evolve. So 15 years
And
ago,
when we say labor and demand forecasting, that's just like how many people we need at the end
correct.
of this year and so on, right? So
Yes,
okay,
as well as what skills they may need to have. And so
that's
the
true.
combination of the
Yeah.
two is really where the evolution has really come in. So PM skills, for instance, today relative to 5 years ago, very different, right? You're and in a couple of years from now, you're expecting more, let's say, vibe coding. You're expecting,
100%. Yes. Yeah.
uh, how you think about design and systems
Yes.
of managing the complexity of your organization
Yeah.
is very different as a product leader.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, if you just take product management, right, the whole idea of the way a product management organization is structured is going to change fundamentally.
Correct.
Right? Between the number of PMs you need, the number of designers you need, the way that work is changing, and in many ways, the organization is getting flatter.
Yep.
Right.
That's right.
So I 100% agree that this is it's an interesting time because you're forecasting demand of people and skills, but in a time in which we're redefining what people and skills mean traditionally to begin with, right?
Correct. Yeah. So now kind of stepping back into the question you asked in terms of what does that mean in terms of AI today versus or technology today versus technology in 3 to 5 years. A lot of vendors have really started to have been looking at making scheduling easier, assessing skills, kind of as the two core pieces. So kind of the softer version, if you will, the skills layer, and then on the more quantitative version, the scheduling, right? So I want to be able to come in and schedule people or predict time and absence in order to backfill roles. Let's say if you're going into a heavy seasonal work type of scenario. So that kind of compliance based monitoring, as well as the ability to just decompose individuals' experience into skills to try to understand who they are and what they do, has been the focus over the last 10 years for the organizations that have really have thought more about AI in the context of workforce management. Now, where it's heading is the more interesting part, right? Because there's no single agent that's going to come in and coordinate like end-to-end every single thing. The emerging shift is much more about, one, how do we really build the initiation of when an agent needs to be activated? So, for example, you may come in and detect a change in demand. You may break the resulting work into tasks. You may identify available employees. You may have, digital agents that are also being stood up. You may propose assignments. You're going to trigger approval. So essentially saying, I'm going to build out an entire workflow based on the work that is needed to take place, and then essentially being able to build that out as a structure. Simultaneously, you have to coordinate across different agents. So the connectivity between, what work is needed to be done and kind of having a system be proactive in flagging that, as well as then saying, here's what a potential plan looks like, and bringing kind of that human in the loop validation is really where we're kind of headed, I would say, in kind of the 3 to 5 years. And it allows us to make workforce planning much more continuous.
Yes.
You're not going to get away from annual headcount exercises, but ideally it's supplemented by what HR leaders already do today, which is
Yes.
real-time capacity, real-time assessment of skills and demand signals, right? The task itself becomes a more important unit of analysis. So it's so hard today to be able to really define what we do in our day-to-day,
Yeah.
right? But being able to really see roles as a collection of activities and saying what should be automated, what should be redesigned, what should be protected as distinctly human,
Yes.
versus
Yeah.
what should be, leveraged via agents, is really a big generational shift that could occur in kind of the coming years that will allow us to be able to translate what we're
Mhm.
building for now towards how labor can move into the future.
100%. Do you mind if I just,
Yeah,
if
no, of
it's
course.
okay for me to dig into the future a bit? So I 100% agree with you, this idea that by having agents who do cut across this data, across different information silos, you'll be able to do better forecasting, more accurate forecasting, and even with less effort on the human side. Because
Hmm.
I still think I agree with you that you still need to have humans in the loop, because otherwise, the system just doesn't know what good
Yeah.
looks like. But tell me, so that takes care of the problems that they currently have, right? But just based on the conversations we've had in the past, AI can do things, or at least the way I understand it, that now you can do things that you can never think about doing it as well, right? There are new capabilities or new ways to actually run the business
Yeah.
that was never possible before. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I mean, even the roles conversation we were just having, it's
Yeah.
not really something that is possible today, right? There's so many roles out there where we talk about no one quite understands what we do, but a role is critical to
Right.
the organization. Well, what does that mean? At the end of the day, we're doing activities that are hard to decompose into actual built out
Hmm.
structures that can be um, repeatable, scalable, modeled in such a way that it can really enhance the organizational productivity regardless of our placement in that particular role. So that's an example of how essentially
Hmm.
the transformation becomes about how the labor experience itself can get transformed via AI, because our systems start to understand who we are, what we do, and how we do it. And then that allows managers too to be able to then increasingly supervise mixed teams, right? You're
Right.
looking at balancing employees and
Yeah.
contractors, but also multiple AI agents with different capabilities and permissions, right? It allows us to really
Yeah.
be able to kind of hit economies of scale,
100%.
um, and we kind of start moving away from career recommendations into routing kind of the work in terms of what
Yeah.
kind of assignment actually looks
That
like.
makes sense. Yeah. I like that too. I'm curious, do you see also a shift in, because right now, in most cases, people management systems are run by the human resource department within a large organization. Do you see that by building in these agents and talking about this future that you've outlined, do you see that some of it now moving right into the lines of business as well?
Uh,
Or do
you
you
know,
see that, do you see, I'm curious what your point of view is on that one.
yeah, that's a good question. I'll reframe that a little bit though, if that's okay.
Yeah,
The
please do. I'm a novice, so I'm learning.
I've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of CHROs and
Yes,
sorts of TA, as well as a lot of people within their teams.
100%.
The
Yeah.
best HR teams never really they never really come in and say we want to run the system end to end.
Mm.
Um, you know,
It's always a partnership. I agree with you. I mean,
yeah,
yes.
and it's almost more of a like they're looking for systems that can really help them delegate in the best way possible.
Yeah.
It's the same way that I've seen um, IT and the office of the CIO
Yeah.
often work. Same, pretty much every back office organization, whether it's finance, IT, HR, they hold the accountability, but they step back from the actual sorry, they lean in actually, like when they're
Yes.
looking at
Yeah.
experience
Yeah.
to see how that fits the employee layer versus themselves.
Yeah.
If I were, every time I've ever taken a list of like, here are your top 10 enhancements pick the two that you'd want to do. Like an HR leader or an IT leader will always pick the ones that are going to impact their employees more than themselves. And the reason I'm kind of framing it that way is because I think the advantage that we have is that the delegation willingness is already there. For most organizations, the best HR teams will always want to come up with ways in which they can potentially come in and empower the managers more, to kind of take more ownership, have hiring managers maybe even come in and say, okay, what does your ideal unicorn candidate look like? Come in and take a look at, the best 10 candidates in the market. If you like them, then let's start to reach out to them, build out the engagement models, right? Because at the end of the day, that's who they're coming to work for.
100%.
Most systems don't really scale in that way. They are kind of built more with a siloed hierarchy in mind. So the collaboration experience often lags behind. And that's kind of the other place where the AI, agentic transformation can really come in and step into it as well. Because the agent can then say, oh, I see that you're asking about this, but person B is asking about this in your organization. Here's how I can help coordinate between the two of you. Would you be interested in going there?
Interesting. I think that, yes, that makes sense. And thank you for the reframe, because you're absolutely right. Good partnerships always lean in, and that makes sense. And this, from the vision you're talking about, would make that even tighter. And better. which gets me to the other question, is to say that, okay, let's say that this has been built, which I know is a challenge, and I want to get into that one as well. But this does require changes in the way the organization itself run, right? So talk to me about, how does an organization, how does one of your clients or customers adapt to the shift or this change? Or what is going to be the hardest part about this change?
That's a great question. And that is the primary piece of this whole layer, right? Like, to some degree, the software part is almost easier than the adoption part.
Always.
Because that's more about how do we get the organization to come in and scale with that. Let me kind of start with some ways in which it's happening today, and then we can talk about where the struggles are as well, because many organizations are still in a transitional stage. The one thing that I have often seen is organizations will come in and launch a governance council. So it used to be data governance council, now it's AI governance council.
Yes.
But there'll often be something kind of around that, in terms of a committee that is building out like the operating discipline that is really required in order to build out the organizational mindset for how to adopt a capability.
Right.
There is also often let's start with one or two simple use cases, build the buy-in, and then scale from there.
Right.
Piece as well. So very, very often you will see that organizations lean into their vendors to say, okay, tell me what you're doing, versus here's what we're looking for. So that becomes a bit of a push-pull as well. Most organizations are not staffed to build out their own AI teams, right?
No.
So they're often then going to their workforce management vendor and saying, okay, what does AI look like in your organization? The challenge is the orchestration piece, right? Most vendors are only looking within their own stack. They're not sitting on top of everything else and saying, okay, how do I help you do this across 3, 10, 15 systems? That's really where Rival differentiates, because we see so much struggle in terms of data fragmentation, manual steps continuing to encroach in these, shadows of systems of record, if you will, and the skills gap that organizations have, because they're not integrations experts, they're not AI experts. They need someone else to kind of come in and build out that layer, as well as then the training flow of what that experience looks like. So that's the core struggle in terms of, how the adoption takes place. It starts with one or two use cases, but the kind of the full orchestration requires, stronger data model, clear ownership,
Right.
clear process flow of what the automation of the existing process looks like, and ownership of change management. And
Mm,
if your existing vendor is not going to be the one to kind of come in and do that, you're essentially going to need a system of orchestration that can really own and
yes.
drive that.
What in your experience, what are those one or two use cases that are key that most organizations, or the most popular use cases that organizations start with, that at least give them a little taste of what the future is going to bring?
Yeah, it's well, I mean, let's pick some common ones, right? Pre-boarding,
Right.
offboarding.
Mm,
When you're offboarding, you can deactivate someone. Doesn't
yeah.
your system can do that, but think about all the steps that have to happen afterwards. The next 6 months where you have to keep a portal stood up where they can download data, they can reach out and request references. They
Yes.
may need to turn the laptop in, or maybe there are other questions that they have.
Yeah. There's a whole process. I agree. Yeah.
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 And you have to make sure that the data itself is flowing across like several different systems. You may still have to do more time tracking or kind of like communicate the PTO piece. Half the time these are happening in emails with some HR person. There's no
Right.
reason all of this shouldn't be automated so that HR teams can do strategic work. Mergers and acquisitions are other ones. If you're kind of coming in and saying, okay, like I'm going to do M&A and I'm trying to build out scheduling and labor demand forecasting, now that I've kind of merged multiple organizations into one, like really being able to kind of scale that out is another area where the AI redefinition is going to be a key one as workforce management planning really starts to come in.
Yeah. I think that's great. What I really like about the way you're thinking about this is that you really are breaking down the silos between an organization, right? Because it's unfortunate, but when we put in systems of any kind, we create these artificial silos because the information is locked in systems or in people's heads.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing something like this, you can build an orchestration layer that cuts across all of those things.
Yeah.
It's the perfect way for, it's that holy grail of an organization being more nimble and agile,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes.
So that brings back to you and companies like yourself is to where does your organization fit into all this? Because of course the vision's great. I understand the challenges that a company has to go through, but at the end of the day, it's a partnership between them and you. Right?
Yeah.
So where does company like Rival help?
Yeah. No, good question. Well, without making it a pitch, I think there are two distinct roles, right? Like
Yeah.
like most vendors are playing one or the other. The first is embedding AI directly into specific workflows. And then the second, so that becomes, I'm going to do smarter scheduling or smarter interviewing or smarter sourcing or do automated compliance checks. I'm kind of picking a use case, going deep, and that's like the one thing that I'm doing better than everybody else. That's where most of the market is right now.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, it's incredibly valuable. It's also narrow. There's nothing wrong with the narrow. That's really how you get
Yes.
the depth of like learning through kind of the whole piece. The second role is, while you're doing that, you're also building out the orchestration layer underneath these individual agents. So you're kind of having that shared context that lets them actually coordinate instead of operating as an isolated smart tool. So let's say, Rival has a smart scheduling, but it may not be the best scheduling that you want.
Right.
Bring in your own scheduling. You're wanting to integrate with the payroll or compliance tool that you prefer, like bring that in, right? So kind of the shared context of letting them actually coordinate instead of operating
Yeah.
as isolated smart tools is an investment that fewer providers are making because, I mean, honestly, it's a less flashy build.
Yeah.
but for us, we thrive in it because we appreciate the governance responsibility that comes along with it. Because as you're taking on more autonomous actions, it's the provider's role then to build out the guardrails,
Mm-hmm.
right? What is the audit trail you're looking for? What are the
Right.
human in the loop checkpoints, the compliance controls, beyond just the automation itself? And kind of the combination of those two things really help you scale into that next level.
Yeah. No, I think that I agree with you. I mean, and it's a big job and a big response. It's a lot of work to be done. There is a question that is on the chat, so I'm actually going to
Sure.
put it in. Florin, thanks for asking. And I think this goes back to both questions we talked about. Both, it's about trust in the orchestration, right? And I actually think, if it's okay with you, Florin, I'm actually going to expand the question. Is number one is, how can HR trust this orchestration? Because there's always has to be human in the loop. And then how does Poornima, a company like yours, help build that trust?
Yeah,
Right? Because I think it's a shared responsibility.
agreed. I obviously in this industry, like especially at this time, lots of people have lots of different ways in which they're thinking about it.
Yeah.
I personally think that this kind of model makes people more valuable, not less, because the advice that I would provide here is, if you start with the work instead of the technology, then that allows HR, as well as people managers, to select a few important workflows and
Right.
then map how work is actually performed. Identify the delays, the handoffs, judgment points, repetitive activities, and leverage that to determine, where you would want to see automation, where you
Mm-hmm.
would want to remain in the process or outside the process, what the risk is, the piece, and that will then allow you to be able to determine how AI should either assist or fully own that entire process. Um, so the human verification, you know, doesn't go away. It just shifts to the left in terms
Yeah.
of building out the process flows and the actual experience layer itself before we're bringing in a lot of additional like
Right.
technology into place.
I think that makes perfect sense. Thank you. I mean, it is. I think the change management that you talked about earlier, and this ability that how do you trust the system, is a big. Again, it's not a software piece; it's a human piece, and it's an adoption piece.
Yeah,
But I think there's definitely things that you talked about in which we can actually help accelerate that moment, at least accelerate that change.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah, exactly.
um,
There's no need to wait for the market to mature, right? Like
yeah,
the
100%.
finished version of the technology almost never exists.
Yes,
It just means learning the hard lessons later than your peers.
yes,
So I think from that change perspective, like really finding out the the flows where the
hmm
human in the loop can be critical becomes an important part of the journey.
yeah. I agree with you. I think anytime for any organization that's waiting on AI is really shooting themselves in the foot of any kind. And just, yes, we help product organizations, but we've seen product organizations, just what we were talking about before, right? It's rare to see product organizations not use AI at all,
Hmm.
right? Because it's just the way work is going to change. And I think that's the same philosophy when it comes to workforce management. Um, Listen, I promised you 35 minutes, but like this is what always happens when you get into a good conversation, you end up going beyond time.
It's
So I'm
okay.
going to ask you for your one last question so I can respect your time. Um, any advice? I mean, Purnima, what you're talking about is a major change in the way you manage your workforce, right? Just the way you're thinking about the use of agents, how organization needs to change differently, how companies like Rival fit into that whole change management or into the whole future of that orchestration. I'm curious, how does somebody prepare for that?
Yeah. Yeah, three parts, right? First, fix the foundation before you add agents.
Yeah.
You think about kind of what that redefinition looks like. So, most organizations naturally have this, but an inventory of, what your data flow looks like today, what the
Mm,
interoperability is. Like, don't leave that to IT. Don't
yeah.
leave that to, kind of a
Yeah.
siloed
100%. And that's your
partner.
foundation because you need
Yes.
that in order to do anything else, right?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. So really build out kind of the understanding of, what the interoperability vision is and kind of
Yeah.
start there. Don't trust that just because you have one, system of record that it will handle everything. You're still going to have a
Yes.
coordination problem. It's here now. Like, it's not arriving in some later phase. So as given that, like, part two is really kind of outline your process flow, document it. Today there are so many different ways to do that,
Right.
while leveraging tools, and really being able to kind of define what the process looks like, going back to the earlier question, allows us to then say, okay,
Yeah.
where can we not live with manual, verification, because let's say there's a compliance risk, or because we're not ready as an organization, or what have
Right.
you. And then that kind of brings us to the third piece, which is, all of kind of both the data as well as the process, brings you to the third piece of investing in people at the same pace as the technology,
Mm,
right? So the skills shortage, which often happens cyclically, means that, even with the AI rollouts, you're going to need an upskilling plan, that is attached to it. How are you actually training
yes.
people on data modeling, building artifacts, building skills, in connection with how the capabilities themselves are actually being leveraged
Yeah.
in the system.
Of those three things, what do you think is the hardest one?
It's typically the first, because that relies on the,
Yeah.
building out the AI governance council, or essentially having that single owner that can
Yeah.
come in and say, okay, here's how I'm going to build the
I
overall
agree.
plan. And then
Yeah.
these are kind of the project flows, right?
And it
This,
makes sense too because, as an executive, you have to first make investments in that
yep,
first before you actually see anything, right?
correct, correct.
But it literally is taking over the technical debt that you have in order to move on.
Yeah. And
Um,
yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Anyway, this is fantastic. I would love to figure out where this goes about in a year from now and see how much of it has changed and
Yeah.
how much of our thinking has changed.
Yes.
Purnima, thank you again for being such a great guest. This has been fantastic.
My
Um,
pleasure. Thanks for
thank
having me.
you. We will have to have you back. Yes.
Yes. Sounds good.
Perfect.